OJ, this for Central Cali right here. Yeah, 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 yeah. Keep the poor from out my rights. Immigration ain't an issue for the right, cause it ain't right to have the right to keep the laws in favor of the job creator. When the job creator ship a factory for cheaper labor, labor low enough to keep the people quiet and complacent. When the money's getting spent right on the soil that's adjacent to the place where they are starving. So hop a fence, coffee in my blood will keep the dogs up off my scent. Skin color versus the board of education. If you ain't catch that line, then you should study segregation. This is rap mediation. Time to snap you right back.
Hello, workers and comrades. This is Volgin.
And this is Maine.
Today we have Chairman Jack of the United Leninist Front here for an interview. Hello, Chairman Jack.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. This is my first time being on Workers' Truth since the former videos that you guys used to do since restarting, where I talked about austerity in Detroit and Dan Gilbert's scummy ass.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Chairman Jack.
More than
appreciate
happy
it.
to be here. More than happy to be here.
Yeah, so I wanted to begin off this little interview here by asking what I think is a very important question when it comes to most of our radical politics, and that is where you began in your path into radical politics, such as what were the things that you were seeing that started to show you why radical politics is a necessary thing? What pushed you into that realm?
Yeah, so I think I had threefold issues. Was my father was a UAW trade unionist his whole life, so I was always like knowing that workers need to have a degree of control in order to get their rights. And then also my freshman year of high school, I took a history class, and the history class was split USA, USSR, and I was put on the USSR side, and I was really just like a standard Democrat at the time, blue no matter who. But then when I had to start defending the actions of Stalin, I really thought about these things and started to look more and more into the USSR. I went on this ideological path, and then like many, I got derailed in what I was doing and quickly took up the Sanders campaign and described myself as a democratic socialist for a very long time until I talked to a Norwegian comrade who was in what basically Bernie Sanders wanted, and he said this is not socialism. Like, harm mitigation means nothing compared to like genuine worker ownership of the means of production. So that pushed me into going beyond just thinking that we can reform to these places and acting like we can just go about reformism. So like many, I took up being like a quote-unquote libertarian Marxist, realizing that's an oxymoron now and a Luxemburgist, and viewing like, oh, all these people are so bad and we have to go about things peacefully and try to go about the revolution doesn't have to be that bad type stuff, which I find ironic because I got into these radical politics due to defending Stalin. But how I changed my mind is what's leading me to being chairman now is I was added to the United Leninist Front, and at the time was filled with a lot of MLM Maoists, and so I took up that line after being educated. I think our current member Tony, for that, he was the one who really helped me learn all these terms and become a Marxist, and he was the one who really helped show me what it means to be a Marxist-Leninist and a Maoist and all these things. And so I really thank him for that, and that started my ideological journey, I'd say, and to my current circles, being a Marxist-Leninist.
So with that, how do you think your journey into radical politics and your pathway through numerous ideologies, viewpoints, how do you think that is informed where you are now?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand everyone's backgrounds and why a lot of people take the positions they do. Like, I think after a recent CWL class we talked about Engels, his book, Socialism, Scientific and Utopian. Like, we have to understand why people hold these utopian views that they do, and coming from a utopian background, thinking we could all just, have the revolution and be going kumbaya on the streets and everything would be okay, to genuinely looking at these things as a science and how things progress and understanding that revolutions are not a dinner party, they're extremely violent. It just helps understanding other perspectives and furthers my own view of dialectics and how we have to grow and develop to truly comprehend Marxist dialectics and our ideology now, we have to understand these other backgrounds and why they exist. Nothing exists in a vacuum, and everything exists in context.
Yeah, I agree completely. For the next question, I'll hand it over to Volgin.
All right. So thank you, Maine, for the first question. So on to the second one, and it kind of leads into what you were talking about before. Is how did you know now how you became radicalized, but how exactly did you get involved in a channel like the United Leninist Front? Or no, actually, specifically, how did you get involved into the United Leninist Front and LeftTube and all that?
Yeah, so what the United Leninist Front was originally was a kick chat from an iFunny grouping out of all things, which I find quite funny looking back on it now.
Big things have humble beginnings.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really how it started, was a couple of people. The only person who's still around from those days is Tony, was an original founder. I came in about, I think, 3 months after the ULF was founded. And how we became a YouTube channel was literally one day we were all just talking on Skype, and we said, let's get some content out there. Let's start making content.
Yeah.
And we did. I wish we still had some of our older videos, but those have since gotten taken down by someone who helped found it, known as I won't say names or whatever, but they hadn't been active in 3 years, and they deleted the channel after I updated the bios and took them out. So I don't know, now we're rebuilding. But how I got involved and how things happened was just simply that, like, we randomly decided let's make a YouTube channel, and everything has been existing from there.
Which I think it's important that in the age of, because there's more independent media now than there's ever been, so I think it's important now that there are actual Leninist media out there like the ULF. But I think it's also important that people just don't focus on media. There's as all the great theorists says, there's theory and there's activism, and there's theory and practice. And I think it's important that when said people are making videos and stuff, they don't lose focus of that, because there are personalities that I've seen that justify their laziness by saying, oh well, I'm making content, so I'm radicalizing people, so I've done my part. It's like, no, you haven't done your part. You're just
I would agree with that. I think that's the biggest problem that the ULF still kind of has, and is now just finally getting over with this full reboot that we've done after the deletion of the channel. Is we've had so many lifestylists, coming from iFunny. All these people, they do memes and think memes are the way to spread class consciousness, and just doing videos. My thing, since number one, getting involved in real life struggle, and that's what I've always been trying to do. Like, the moment I got a car, I started getting involved because I was able to drive. I think that's a major problem that the ULF has always had, has been lifestylists that talk theory all they want, but they don't do anything. Like, my personal view is of it, I will take someone who has no theoretical knowledge whatsoever, but is out in the street constantly protesting all of this stuff, as long as they have the most minimal idea that what this current system is wrong, and they just want to change it, and they're out in the street constantly over somebody who talks theory all day, makes whatever videos, but doesn't do anything. Because at the end of the day, if you just make videos and you haven't told anyone, like organizations to join, as I think that's another critical thing for the ULF, is telling people organizations to join. If you don't do anything other than make videos and just talk, you have done nothing for the struggle. You mean nothing. Like, people want to be the next Marx, but Marx did things in real life. He formed the first international. He did things more than just theorize.
Yeah. So I was gonna bring up is that a lot of these people online, they think just because they've read a bunch of theory, a lot of the texts too obscure, like left comms for example. They read obscure texts and think that they're geniuses, and they're like, oh, I'm smarter than Stalin. Here's why the Soviet Union is social. I'm not trying to add anyone specific, but that's an example. But like Marx and Engels in the 1840s, during the German revolutions and whatnot, in the revolutions of 1848, Marx and Engels, they led battalions and stuff in Germany, to help the revolution. Like, they were involved. and all these people who think that they're just, that the next Marx because they've read a bunch of obscure texts. I mean, granted, reading theory is very important, and that is another problem because there's a subsection of
But they have to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
That's the fact.
Because there's a subsection of the online left that's even worse than these people. They're the ones that just read memes and think, oh, I know theory now, but then don't do anything.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem that the ULF has always had is lifestyleists. People, like I honestly, I remember talking to Larry Helms, out of all people, who is the secretary of Workers' World. I am no longer... I was never really affiliated with Workers' World. I went to the National Conference to Defeat Austerity, and now I'm candidate member for CWL, which broke off of Workers' World. But I remember talking to Larry Holmes, who was the head, once again, of Workers' World, about these identity communists and lifestyleists, and he was so utterly amazed that people would just pretend to be communists for, like, clout points and look cool on the internet. And I think, we have to confront these people wherever they are. If they don't read theory and just dress up as communists and call themselves whatever, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything if people don't read theory and don't do anything in real life, and I think doing things in real life is extremely important.
So I'd like to butt in on this and throw a follow-up on the issue. It's been being talked about heavily, the lifestyle communists, kind that read theory but sit behind their keyboards or whatever. They don't actually do on-the-ground work. I feel like that's a massive problem across the left as a whole, and especially in the Marxist-Leninist left. What have you seen, or what are your thoughts on what groups and organizations can do to attempt to combat that?
Yeah, I think... I also think there's two different things. There's two different things between genuine armchairs and lifestylists. I think I have a problem with both of them, but for different reasons. I have a problem with lifestylists who don't read theory, but simply dress up as communists for social points and want to look cool. I think they're a problem unto themselves, as they exist in, like, these vacuums and exist in, random meme chambers. And, like, there's a big reason why the ULF banned memeing on Discord, is so people would have genuine conversations rather than being lifestylists. And then you have, armchairs that read theory but don't do anything. Yeah. And, with that, though, I think what organizations should do to combat lifestyleism and armchairism is doing mass work. Like, what Moratorium Now does with, going out in the streets, organizing different issues, going from anything from fighting for a moratorium on on foreclosures and water shutoffs and things like that, and genuinely consulting with, people who are just community members and are worried about, how much taxes they're paying and if they're going to have water at the end of the month. And I think that's so critically important, because we listen to Lenin saying we have to go where the workers are. And I think communists cannot exist in closed doors and offices. They have to go out onto the streets. They have to be doing real mass work, or else it means nothing. Yeah. So I think that's the most key part, is what organizations have to do is organize in the streets and do things with community members, even if, these people automatically think electoralism is the only way to do anything, but, there's other options. It doesn't matter if they're, blue no matter who or whatever, as long as they're willing to do things in the streets. We have to work with the masses and go where the workers are, to quote Lenin.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And because there is another problem with the online left, that they're not organizing. And what you said about discussion is that it's very important for Marxists and socialists in general to talk theory with each other, because if you just do it alone, you could get the wrong impression. It's like Marx and Engels, they always corresponded, and they talked to other socialists. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They discuss for example, there was a massive debate for years over, permanent revolution versus socialism in one country. It lasted until 1928?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, it started in, around 23. So they investigated this for years, but they talked to each other. And what these people that are doing now is that they just go online and they read theory, but they don't discuss it.
And I also think they discuss it with each other, but the Soviets had genuine boots on the ground and were coming up with how to go on with boots on the ground. It wasn't just sitting behind a keyboard. And I also think something integrally important is near ruthless self-criticism amongst friends.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
when you something that the ULF now does with members of the Politburo is when somebody takes a bad line, they get called out for it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we move on from there and just have this constant learning. And I think it goes hand in hand with caring about your comrades, to care about them enough to call them out when they take a bad line, and
Yeah.
that is so extremely
I think
important.
another thing's important about that is that calling them out, but doing it, respectfully, obviously.
Well, yeah,
'cause-
because
yeah.
self-criticism isn't just
Like, haha, you made a
Yeah.
mistake. Like, we're all gonna
it's
gang up on
saying,
you.
let's gain knowledge. Like,
But-
you made this mistake because you didn't have knowledge behind it, and we have
Yeah.
to work towards that. And I
Yeah.
think self-criticism, especially self-criticism when imported by like a grouping, is so integrally important.
Yeah, and I think that's actually self-criticism in itself. I think is a very good distinction between Marxists, specifically Marxist-Leninists, and liberal ideology. I
Even
think that-
anarchist ideology,
and even
too.
anarchist ideology. I think one of the things you see so common is that, especially within liberal circles, is that someone makes a mistake, someone says something wrong, someone takes the wrong line on something, sometimes purposeful, sometimes accidental.
And then
And
there's the cancel culture.
There's
Yeah.
canceled. They're done. They're
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
But it's a mistake they made.
It's either that they try to justify it so much that it's just become wrong, or they just say, "Oh, well, you can never speak again."
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think a perfect example of something like this was Puyi, like the last emperor of China,
Yeah.
who, the Soviets took as a prisoner during World War II, but then Mao wanted him to be extradited back to China, and what did he do? He wasn't executed, he wasn't sent to a labor camp, he was re-educated and
Yeah.
became a Maoist. He self-criticized, and he wasn't canceled, he wasn't executed, nothing.
Yeah.
It was ruthless self-criticism to the point that he realized that upholding feudalism was a bad idea, and that this was the new way forward to better China and to better the world. So I think self-criticism is so important, because this idea that somebody did something so they automatically should be destroyed, I think is a liberal ideology. Like, people can grow and learn, they just have to acknowledge what they have done and remember not to repeat this and not repeat patterns. And I think that is integrally important to being a Marxist.
Yeah, and obviously there's a distinction. Like, if you're gonna make bad takes, but if, let's say, like Nazis, for example, if you're gonna go through with these actions, then that's different. Because if you're gonna like go out in the streets and call out for a race war and like start assaulting people or possibly even killing people, then it starts to then
Well, yeah, and then you have, like, in a socialist world, these people
Yeah.
would be sent to re-education camps or if so bad and they refuse, just, even
Yeah.
worse than that. But I think
Yeah.
what's so different between communists and other ideologies is, like, look at the Gulag system, for example, and I'm not going to get into fucking the Gulag Archipelago, which was an obvious lie, talked
yeah.
about how, like, his wife admitted that it was a lie and he praised the Nazi invasion.
Oh, yeah.
But what was the Gulag system? They took murderers and all these evil felony level people of society, and what did they do to them? They put them to work, but for what? For a max of, 5 years or 10 years?
I think 5 years.
Yeah,
maybe.
5 years. And then what was the end result? They were given work, they were given housing afterwards, and I think that's a part of self-criticism and moving on, and that's why I think Marxism differs so much from these liberal ideologies, is this like ruthless self-criticism really anyone can learn, because nobody exists in a void and everything exists in context.
There was this one example that I heard. This guy from the he was a kid in the 30s, growing up in the Soviet Union, and he stole some school supplies from his school, and so he got sent to the Gulag. And he said that, well, I was given housing, I was given food, obviously, I mean, contrary to popular belief, the Soviet Union only had a famine 3 times. One was caused by the Civil War. The second, well, was caused by a drought, and then the third time, after World War II. So he ended up earning a medal for his work as a laborer in the Gulag, and afterwards, they gave him an apartment, and he got to go to school while in the Gulag, and it's just one example of a society that isn't built on shame but healing.
It isn't built on punitivism.
Yeah.
It's built on helping people and genuinely wanting rehabilitation over this idea of punitivism, because nothing fundamentally changes if you kill someone who sells heroin or whatever. Like, nothing is fundamentally different about society. And I just think, once again, like, that's why self-criticism and re-education is so vitally important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, to move on to the next general, overall question. So, obviously, in circles like these, in the leftist sphere, there are many ideologies. What do you personally follow more than anything else?
Oh, well, I would still self-describe as MLMZT. I think I don't describe as a Maoist, or a Maoist in the sense of like MLM, due to the fact of, I think I reject the ideas of social imperialism. I think it's an incorrect and an ultra tendency to view something. I even think it's anti-Leninist to view the USSR or even China as imperialist, because they're not spreading finance capital. They're not trying to divide nations. They're not overthrowing governments. So I think that criticism is very wrong. I reject, saying electoralism is automatically something that should be tossed out. Like, to quote Lenin, like, it's a tool in the toolbox, and it can't be. I think you guys, one of you might know the quote that he said to like the Kauskyites of saying like how you shouldn't just reject parliamentarianism. Like, where is your Soviet Republic in Germany to say that we don't need to go to parliamentarianism? So I think I reject such a thing, but I acknowledge that Mao did great things, and I think his personal additions are extremely important, such as like primary and secondary contradiction, new democracy, all these things. So I would describe myself as a Maoist, while also, since getting involved with CWL and learning about global class war, I would also describe myself to a degree as someone who strongly believes in the theory of global class war, believing that there are, two camps in the world: socialist nations, the worldwide proletariat, and oppressed nations, like nations that are attacked by imperialism, such as, Assad or something like that, versus collaborator nations like Bolsonaro in Brazil, and then, imperialist nations like the United States and the worldwide capitalists.
Yeah.
So I would describe myself as a mix of those two things: a Maoist and someone who also fundamentally believes in global class war as a, addition to primary and secondary contradictions, like a way, almost like dialectics, as a way to analyze modern geopolitical problems through secondary and primary contradictions, while also having an entirely new term for it.
Well, I think that that the basic concept of global class war isn't unique to the Marxi and the workers. But for example, because I always recommend the Foundations of Leninism as an early start. 'Cause in general, Stalin is a good start to educating yourself, because honestly, he's a very good start, because it's not Harvard level reading. It's
And that's another reason why I like Mao is
he wrote to the peasants.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with global class war, I think something that why I like the term is just because it's adding a term to something that didn't exist. Lenin talks about primary and secondary contradictions in New Democracy, but there was no term for it. Mao came in and added these things to theory, genuinely considering these as ideas rather than just tactics, I think is what makes it kind of fundamentally different, and why I think these things need to be viewed upon. I think more people need to look into certain sections of global class war and the American destiny. Honestly, I think CWL might. I'll talk to people and try to convince them to do a modern day rewriting, just because to simplify it, because it's a very complex document. But besides that, so to sum it up, I would describe myself as a Maoist who fundamentally believes in the idea of global class war as as an evolution to primary and secondary contradictions and a lens of modern geopolitical situations.
Yeah, because like I was saying before, that Stalin said, for example, in Foundation of Leninism, that, for example, on how we should oppose imperialism, the national question, he brought up the example of Afghanistan, which at the time during the multiple British invasions was an emirate. It was a
Yeah, it was a
monarchy.
It was a feudal reactionary monarchy,
But
yeah.
it was British imperialism. Another example was the bourgeois, Democratic Republic of Egypt in the early 20s. That was resisting British imperialism.
Yeah.
That was at the time governed by the Labour Party, a so-called, socialist-esque, political party that was supposed to,
Be anti-imperialist.
Yeah,
don't care
but they
about the
were
international.
imperialist.
Yeah, exactly. Or when Lenin defended the Republic of Turkey against the Western invaders and supported them in the War of Independence against the Ottomans and against the Western imperialists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think a follow-up question to your ideology is, how would you say that your ideology as being this MLMZT/Maoist type influenced your activism?
Yeah, I just think reading Lenin and looking what Lenin had to contribute, as well as pairing like how to view international struggle through a Maoist lens and how Mao would talk about it is very important. So, how I would affect my activism is, I do a lot of mass work down in Detroit with Moratorium Now, and I think it's very important to do work like that. And I'd recommend anyone in the Detroit metro area to try to come down to a meeting. I think it's very, very important to be where the workers are, where these people who are community activists are, and as well as what protests and things like that. I recently went to a protest for against Trump's deal of the century, and I think we had, no matter who is currently in charge of the main stream of Palestinian struggle, whether it be the PFLP or Hamas or whoever, whether they be liberals or Islamists or Marxists, as long as they are fundamentally against Southern colonialism, we have to support them, and we have to support what the Palestinian people want, and that's a part of primary and secondary contradiction. So these are both things that change my activism and how I act is reading Lenin, reading Mao, reading Stalin, reading Marx, Engels, whoever I think is valuable. I'll read Guy Debord in Society of the Spectacle because I think he has a good analysis on recuperation and how modern society functions. I disagree with him and how he acted, but I think these theorists are important to see how we look at the world and how the world has changed.
Yeah, and with the CWL, as it was originally from the WWP, which was from the CW.
No, it was from. So, I'll give a quick rundown just as a quick little thing. So, the SWP, which is the Socialist Workers' Party, originally came, I believe, was one of the early split-offs from CPUSA. They were a Trotskyite grouping. And then Workers' World split off due to supporting the Soviets going into Hungary and putting down the counter-revolution and viewing Mao as a socialist revolution.
Yeah.
So that's where Workers' World came from. And then CWL split off due to Workers' World kind of turning into a non-profit to a large degree. And other such reasons that I don't really need to go into.
Yeah.
So there's just a basic rundown of how everything went about.
No, well, so I was going with that is that obviously Marcy, at least early on, if you read Global Class War, a lot of the document includes Trotskyite language, and there are some activists that not CWP, the CWL that have Trotskyite tendencies. But I think the important thing to recognize here is that unlike the Trotskyists online that are historically that just are snitches, that these guys, because they follow Global Class War and what Marcy said, and granted Marcy
and they self-describe as Marxist-Leninists.
Yeah, and granted Marcy wasn't, great on Stalin, but still, at the end of the day, he defended the Soviet Union.
I think to respond to that is twofold. So Sam Marcy, I think, had a personal view against Stalin due to the fact that he was a loyal CPer, but then the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact happened, and the Soviets and the USSR refused to explain why they were doing it. They refused to explain why it was a tactical thing to the whole world. And, they were the homeland of the revolution. And how are these people supposed to react when they see them working hand in hand with Nazis and refusing, like the CPUSA even refused to organize counter-protests against the massive meeting of Nazis in Madison Square in the 30s because the Soviets told them not to. What are you supposed to do when it's refused to explain to you?
Yeah.
So that the SWP, no matter how small it was at the time, and even though they were Trotskyites, were the main people formulating protests against them. So Sam Marcy joins, and I think even different than that, I think Trotskyites are kind of used as a buzzword. And I think there's a lot of Trotskyites that view Trotsky as, or so-called Trotskyites, that view Trotsky as just like the liberal opposition to Stalin, when that's not really true. I think Trotsky, say whatever you will about him, was still, very hardline Marxist to a degree that, if given the chance, would have rolled the tanks into Hungary too. And I hate when Trotsky would say, I'm against being a tanky. No, like Trotsky was a war leader. But besides the point, I think the fundamental difference between, using these standard Trotskyites trying to rebuild the Fourth International, special third camp section, whatever BS, is these people, CWL fundamentally defends China as a socialist state, fundamentally, or a proletarian state, whatever term you want to use, fundamentally defends Cuba, fundamentally defended the USSR, fundamentally, defended worldwide Marxist-Leninist movements and self-described as Marxist-Leninist. And so I think, that's the difference. That is the difference. They're not saying, go support, ISIS against Syrian imperialism. They're saying go defend Syria against U.S. imperialism because they are under threat by the global imperialists, and that is global class war. And I think that's what makes them so fundamentally different than these standard random Trotskyites you hear about online.
But where I was going with that is that I think it's important that I don't think we have to agree with each other on everything.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Because, like, the one difference, like, you were talking to one of the people in CW, and it's like, well, the only disagreement we're going to have is on Stalin.
Yeah.
And it's like, same thing, like, me and you, I think the only disagreement me and you have is on, like, the term Maoism. Like, me and you have a different view on Deng, but that's 80s China. That's not relevant to now.
Yeah, exactly.
The point, like, you have your views on him, and I have my views on him in 80s China and whatnot, but today, like,
none of that is relevant.
Yeah, none of that's relevant. Me and you both support China now as a socialist state, and we'll defend it against imperialist attacks. We both support Palestine. We both support Assad against U.S. imperialism. We both support all these different movements against U.S. imperialism and the idea of, abolishing capitalism and establishing a socialist state. And that's what's important.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, like, this vague idea of sectarianism, but, like, when there's two Marxist-Leninists who are fundamentally, like, would describe themselves as such, to a large degree, and view Marx and Lenin as two fundamentally important figures, if we can agree on 90% of things, I don't care about the 10%. I don't care about how you viewed, Stalin versus Trotsky. I don't care about how you view Deng and how I view Deng.
Yeah.
I don't care about, how you view whatever, as long as you are fundamentally on, our side in global class war, on the side of the proletariat, on the side of, like, overthrowing U.S. imperialism. That's my line, is will you, when chips are on the table, will you say U.S. imperialism is the wrong imperialism around the world? We cannot support the West, and we have to support, fundamental changes to the modern hegemony of the world. So I think, that's what's important. I don't care if we disagree on 10% of the issues. If we agree on 90%, we can work together, and we can be in the same organization.
So I'd like to ask the final question here of the interview, and that is about your involvement in activism. And it was kind of touched upon in the previous question and your answer lightly. But I'd like to ask you, how and to what extent are you involved in activism, and how does that influence your ideology? And how does that just overall influence you?
Yeah, so I try to do as much stuff as I can with, like, gas and things like that, and affording to be able to go down to, like, where things are really going off in Detroit with the different issues and trying to get different moratoriums and things like that. So, and then now trying to start to do a little more work up north and thinking about doing more work in Flint and surrounding rural areas and things like that, and, trying to formulate different things. But I think what makes me view activism as so important, as I've been touching on across all of this, is if you can't bring yourself to be active in real life, you mean nothing to the struggle. You had, like, if you were Thanos snapped in an instant, you went away, what would the view to me is, what would be different? what would be even the most slightly changed thing if you were gone? Is like, oh wow, you can't randomly shitpost memes in a Discord chat anymore. Like, what does it mean to the struggle that you are doing something? Yeah. So like, yeah, say whatever you want about one protest or whatever you want, but that is fundamentally like doing something. You are doing something. You are, you know, for solidarity forever, to quote solidarity forever, nothing, what is it? Nothing is weaker than the feeble force of one. Mm-hmm. We have to come together in numbers. So, going out and doing something, building numbers is fundamentally so better. And I can't even, the better doesn't describe it than just sitting around doing nothing. And I think that is so critically important. Anyone who is interested in getting involved in any orgs, all I can do is really recommend stuff in the United States. I know different communist organizations around the world, but I don't know exact lines and things like that. I can really only recommend different areas in the United States. So anyone who's interested, just give me like you can comment like a general area, and I can recommend, different organizations for people to join if they're interested.
Yeah, and that does lead to a follow-up. Just kind of in a general sense, I know there's a lot of specific issues. Some people have bigger issues like that they prefer to deal with as imperialism or climate change or economics or so forth. My question for you is, where in general would you recommend people to go and get involved?
Yeah, I think it depends on what area you're in. If you're in a city with different communist orgs, like, the Bay Area, Detroit, I think we have a branch maybe in Wisconsin, but I'm not sure. I think we have one in Rockville, Illinois. The CWL is there, no matter how small in number in certain areas, but we still exist after these big splits. So I'd say stuff like that. Workers' world, no matter what it is, it's still like a starting off point for a lot of people. And I think even though they kind of rad-libbed out, there's still a half. I won't come to fundamentally to their defense, but it's still something. Like, it's better to do something than nothing. And if you're from an area with no communist organizations, get involved in at least the most minimal mass work against austerity. Like, if you're living in a rural area and your buses are starting to be privatized, go to your fellow, and you're at like a high school, or you're just living in a community or something like that, go to your fellow students, go to your fellow neighbors and say, this is wrong, we need to fight this. So whether it be a communist organization or just a mass organization against capitalism, whether it be fighting austerity or whatever, I think that's something to do. So anyone in any situation can always do something, because we're always being affected by capitalism.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that was kind of going to lead off to this thing I had to say, and I've been meaning to say earlier, is that there is a genuine problem, because unlike other groups, like, liberals and stuff, most communists do not have the privilege most of the time because, most communists are working people.
Mm-hmm.
They're not petty bourgeois or anything like that, so they don't have, so...
Well,
it's important.
There are petty bourgeois communists.
Well, I mean, like, you know what I mean, though.
Yeah,
but
it's a working class movement. Yeah, I get you.
But it's important that to note two things. That one, that a lot of people don't have the time to.
I think that's one part of it. But with people who genuinely, like, you work so much that you can't get involved, that is understandable.
That's how I was going with that.
And I entirely agree with that analysis.
Yeah.
But like, sometimes people work too much to read theory. They don't want to read theory after working 14 hours, and they're just so tired they need to get sleep because they have work the next day, and that's understandable. But I'm just saying, to the people that are looking to do something, there is always something to do. If you want to do something, it exists. Nothing just exists solely in your bedroom or your basement or whatever. There is something outside your door. If you want to get involved, it is very, very possible for you to do such quite easily. And that's what I meant. Like, I'm not saying everyone has to be out in the street constantly, because a lot of people simply can't. But for those who can and want to be, you absolutely should.
That's what I kind of like about moratorium now. It's like, because it's all these people, these working people, these people that are suffer hardships. But, it's important to note two things. That one, people don't always have the time to do this because they're working. But two, that working people, that are very active, that care, they make sure that they get all the time that they can to get involved. And I think that's a great balance to, like, try to to accept. But it's just when people like on YouTube, or anything or online in general, they think that, oh well, I made a video or something, so I've done my part.
Yeah.
When they have time actually to do stuff like this, they
Yeah.
just choose not to. And
Yeah,
that's-
and I've always viewed YouTube as a tool in the toolbox to make people active. Like if I thought anyone who was listening to this just was gonna say, I listened to this video and I'm done. If that was what I think every single person who listens to this is gonna do, I'd stop it tomorrow. But I hold hope that at least one person listening to this is gonna say, hey, this was a good talk and I want to get involved, and so I'm gonna find somewhere to get involved. And that's the difference to me, is like, yeah, I'm active in real life and all this stuff, and I view YouTube as just another tool in the toolbox to educate people and make people want to get involved. And I think that's very, very important, is like, that's all YouTube should be, is just a place to learn, educate yourself, and then use what you've gained to become active in real life. And I think that's the most critically important thing to use YouTube for, and it should never be anything more than that.
So, with that all being said, I think it's now is a good time to conclude the interview.
All right.
I'd like to say again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
been a
very glad
pleasure,
to be
we
here.
very much appreciate it.
I'm extremely glad to be here.
and we hope to be able to have you on maybe another time for another topic.
Yeah, we'd
Yeah.
very much love to have another discussion with you at some point.
Yeah, and I hope everyone listening to this watches all the What Is videos that both Volgin and Magne are also on, in many of them. So I hope whoever is listening to this also watches those.
So, with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Solidarity, and goodbye.